Okay, well, it looks like we're at time. So do you guys mind if I start your introductions?
Please do.
Perfect. Hi, and welcome back to DataCon LA 2020. I'm Emily Shope, your host, and joining me today as my co-host is Subhash D'Souza. We will be moderating the WOVA chat and Q&A for you during the session. We have four speakers joining us for today's panel to discuss accessibility challenges in 2020. Devon is a serial entrepreneur who has been helping grow the Los Angeles tech ecosystem since 2008. Joe is a co-founder of Diamond, an inclusive digital agency, as well as a co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is a day intended to bring awareness of the importance of making digital products accessible to people with disabilities. Bryce Johnson is the inclusive lead for Microsoft Devices. Bryce initiated and designed the first inclusive tech lab at Microsoft, which is a facility where people can explore how people with disabilities interact with Microsoft games, services, and devices. Bryce is also one of the inventors of the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which he has with him today. Lori Samuels is the Accessibility Director at NBC Universal. Lori leads accessibility programs to institute best practices in inclusive design, training, cultural development for disability inclusion, and fortifying executive sponsorship. Caran co-leads accessibility or A11Y initiatives at Google Play. Karo helps to create culture in which A11Y is a core part of the product development cycle. Through her work, she brings A11Y awareness to app developers throughout the world. Speakers, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. Before I begin, I just want to say that it's really exciting for me once again to be participating in DataCon LA, this wonderful conference that Subhash has created. So thanks to Subhash for figuring out how to do this digitally. It is certainly a different experience than it has been in years past, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. So today we're going to be speaking about accessibility challenges of 2020. I would like to let you know before we begin, though, that we do have a captioner. So if you look below, right about here, there's a closed caption button that you can turn on and put the subtitles, and then you'll be able to see everything that we're saying, and it is being captioned by Ewan in real time. So we're excited to be able to offer that. If you're having any issues, we're going to monitor the chat, so please let us know in the chat box on the Whova app. And now, I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. So Karo, would you like to go first and tell us about your background?
Sure. My name is Karo, and I co-lead accessibility program at Google Play, which entails interacting with our users as well as third-party developers. So as far as users, we have to make sure that our apps such as the Play Store, Play Games, Play Books, and the developer console are accessible to people with disabilities. And as far as developers, we want to make sure that they know what accessibility is and where they can find resources to create accessible apps.
Thank you, Karo. Lori, please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So my name is Lori Samuels, and as mentioned, I'm the accessibility director right now for NBC Universal, and I just started there in February. Prior to that, I was at Microsoft for about 4 years as a consultant, getting the chance to work with different product organizations to help stand up or create and lead accessibility programs. Also did some interesting, initiatives, one of which was around making the kitchens and cafes accessible to Microsoft employees, which was kind of a fun project. Let's see, I kind of come out of the software industry. My background is in software engineering and development from a very long time ago, back pre-internet. So I've been interested in accessibility for a very long time, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Lori. And Bryce?
Hi, thanks for having me. I've been a designer at Microsoft for about 10 years. And for about half that time, I've gotten the chance to focus on accessibility full time. At first, I sort of started by making things like narrator and magnifier, high contrast, taking those concepts from Windows and putting them on the Xbox console. While we were doing that, we recognized that we needed to do something with controllers, which led to this guy, which is the Xbox adaptive controller, which I have here kind of in front of me. And now I lead hardware accessibility for Microsoft. So I work primarily in Surface, but still sometimes a little bit in Xbox.
Awesome. It is such a pleasure to see that that adaptive controller on this. I bought one myself, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to show us before this is over a little bit about how it works. But we'll come back to that later. Karo, can you tell us the story of how you joined Google and what it's like to work there doing accessibility?
Sure. So I'll try to make a story short. But basically, my hubby and I used to travel in Southeast Asia. We were teaching kids how to use computers, and we're also training the teachers how to teach accessibility. And this really kind of paved the road for me for being always cognizant of accessibility in whatever I chose to do later on in life. And so at some point I decided to pursue a PhD program in education, thinking that then I will be able to somehow integrate accessibility and education and teach at the university. But I couldn't find a job at the university because when I graduated with my PhD, this is when the economy tanked. So there were no positions available. And so I ended up sending my CV to many places, including Google. And I first started, just testing Google products. And then slowly I transitioned into the program manager role, which I am in now. The transition was very interesting. I think less so from the accessibility perspective, more so from the people perspective. When I joined, it felt to me like there was this forest of people that I couldn't see very well, and like I just heard their voices and had to somehow remember their names. I think this was the biggest challenge for me, but thankfully, if people are nice and understanding, then obviously, these things, I don't even want to call it an obstacle. It was more like a challenge. This challenge was solved, and I feel very much included and part of the team, and really, really love what I do.
Thank you. And by the way, for everybody, I want this to be more conversational. We have actually plenty of time, as opposed to usually in panels, we're always rushed and barely get through half the questions. So if anybody wants to jump in at any point, feel free. We don't need to do like question, answer. So Karo, how has things changed over there as a result of Google, as a result of COVID, both for you and for your team and the company?
Sure. So for me, things have actually improved because, for example, sometimes I have to take notes as a manager. I have to take notes in meetings. And so if you use Google Meet, there is a feature that allows you to see who is speaking. And so that allows me to actually say something like X person says, versus before I would have no clue who says what, just because if there are many people in the room and they are not familiar to me, I wouldn't be able to see their badges. And so I feel like now actually, the playing field has been leveled, and I kind of have access to the same information that sighted people do. So for me, it's been truly, truly awesome.
That's cool. So essentially, when you have Google Meet, nobody else hears it, right? So it just goes to your headphone or your earbuds. Is that right?
No, it's available for everyone. It's basically like, so you see pictures of everybody who has joined, and then the person who is speaking, there is like this green, some sort of icon around that next to that person.
Uh-huh.
So I can just see that magnified on my screen. All I do is I magnify the screen. I actually don't use a screen reader. So yeah, so I can just see that, and actually everyone else can see that, which is awesome. It's a very universal design.
Ah, got it. Okay. And how do you feel about Zoom by contrast?
I feel like Zoom is easy to use from my standpoint. I feel like, so long as the app is not convoluted, then it's easy to use. I mean, it's different from Google Meet, but that's okay. It doesn't, I don't look for apps that are exactly the same. I think what I'm always looking for is for clarity.
Right. Now, Lori and Bryce, do you have any comment that you'd like to add, whether it's about your experience joining NBC or Microsoft, or how COVID has changed the workplace?
I can speak a little bit on the changing the workplace. It's interesting for me personally. I moved to we moved to northern Utah a few years ago, and out of the Bay Area where I'd been working before. And so all of the work I've been doing for the past 5-6 years has been remote. And so while that did involve some travel to Microsoft or to NBC locations, for the most part, I work, using tools like Zoom and Teams, Microsoft Teams. So I was already used to that. And I think it was less of an adjustment for me. I saw my coworkers work, adjusting to this. I think one of the things that I noticed, especially at the beginning of everyone going to the work from home model, is how much it, I think in some respects, in a positive way, kind of blended or blurred the lines of personal and professional life a little bit, and I think it humanized everyone in a positive way. Again, just I know it was challenging for a lot of people, and I definitely feel sorry for the people who are dealing with kids, especially under the age of 12. I have teenagers who slept till noon, so it wasn't too bad. but for those of I've been through the young kid phase, and I think that's really tough when you've got small children that you're trying to juggle work and home and school, and so that part I think has been painful for a lot of people, and continues to be rough. But I think in some respects there's a positive aspect. I mean, I have definitely read some articles from members of the disability community who've said, well, this is interesting. We've been asking for decades to be able to work from home or have an accommodation that I at least partially work from home, and we're always told that it wasn't possible. And then suddenly all the able-bodied people had to do it, and miraculously it all worked. So I think there is a little irony in that. But I'm hoping that we can kind of continue at least a blended model. So
I agree. If I can chime in here, just wanted to add that for me, working from home has been amazing from the commute perspective. I mean, it took me almost an hour to get to work by shuttle. So now I basically get two hours of my time back every day. And I can work on other things, or whether it's work related or not, but it's just the time that I have back.
Yeah, that certainly helps a lot of people. Bryce, how about you?
I think we're just starting, and I think it's going to get interesting. And what I mean by that is, we always talk about how, I agree with Lori, this has been a boon for the disability community. They get to basically say, listen, we told you this was possible. You see it's possible. I think what's interesting, though, is that it's bringing up concepts that the disability community has been talking about for a long time. And now it's kind of mainstreamed them away. Like if Zoom fatigue and spoon theory aren't bedfellows, I don't know what are, right? Like we all have this idea of, how much we can actually do in a day. And I think we're all learning that being on calls for, 8 or 9 hours a day is extremely tiring. It's draining. And yeah. I know our research teams have been doing a lot of work into that. We're really looking into how we can make calls less draining, and how we think about that. And for us and for me and in our hardware teams, it's about like finding things that can actually help you do these things easier. I mean, you know, I think when we all started, laptops on kitchen tables were the norm, and for many, many people, they're the norm. I don't want to say they're not, but it's not ideal, and we're going to figure it out.
I resemble that remark from my kitchen table.
We actually had an interesting session. We have an employee resource group called My Abilities. So, you know, kind of our disability focused resource group employee network. And one of the sessions that they put on was around ergonomics in the home office, and which, you know, we kind of take for granted in the office space, you know, that you can have someone from ergonomics come check your chair out and make sure you're sitting, you know, comfortably and properly. But many people, you know, really have, you know, they're not set up ideally in a home environment with the chair and a desk or whatever works, you know, physically for comfort and for, you know, for support. So yeah, there absolutely is a lot of issues in that transition, not just, you know, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to paint a bit of a rosy picture here again, because I actually always preferred to work on a tablet. When tablets came out, I was just in awe because I could suddenly hold it like at any angle that was comfortable for me, as opposed to laptops, which are usually at a 90-degree angle screen-wise. And so because I already had a tablet before COVID started, so it's super easy for me to just, you know, read my email on a tablet, or just take a keyboard if I need to write something, and really work from anywhere, from the garden, from the sofa, you know, any surface that, or any place that's convenient, which is awesome. So I'm actually pretty mobile.
That's a great point. Bryce, so I think we've enticed people a little with the visual here. Do you want to describe what we see with the controller, and then explain what are those two big circles, and how would you use it?
Well, so what we've got here is we have an Xbox adaptive controller that I'm going to hold right here. And I have two peripherals that plug into it, two typical peripherals. These are two Logitech buttons. And I have a one-handed joystick over here. But I think before I go into the controller, I kind of want to give you a quick kind of overview of what we were trying to solve and why we needed to create this. And this is a typical regular Xbox controller that I'm holding in my hands. Mm-hmm. And the thing with this, with a traditional controller, this is an 8th generation controller. We're coming up on generation 9. And generation 1, for people who are old enough to remember, was the Atari, just to put it in context. The thing that we've done is that every generation we seem to add more buttons that, to these things, and more functionality to them. Some controllers now, like if you look at a PlayStation controller, it has like has a little trackpad on it. Nintendo controllers have motion sensors in them. So we keep adding functionality to this thing that you're intended to hold with 2 hands and basically use with your 2 thumbs and 2 index fingers. And so the visual that I'm showing is basically like my hands holding a controller, and my hands are about 3 inches apart, where my index fingers are on the front of the buttons and my thumbs are on these 2 thumbsticks. And so what you have to recognize is that this controller has been optimized so that for someone with 2 hands that has fluid range of motion for all these buttons, they can hit 17 buttons with 4 fingers, right? They have the reach to get around to these bumpers and triggers up front, and they have the endurance to be able to hold it for an extended game period. And so for us, the first part of our journey was recognizing that if you couldn't use this as it was designed, that this was the barrier. This is the social model of disability. We designed, you know, a device that limited some people because of how it was intended to be used. So when we created the adaptive controller, in a way, one of the challenges with the adaptive controller was that our engineers kept asking us what the primary use case of the device was. And the only way that we could eventually kind of get over this, because we really were into modularity and flexibility, was to tell them that this is the alternate use case. The regular controller is the primary use case, right? So most people use a regular controller. This is for everyone who can. And so this controller, these 2 big things here are buttons. And I joke that they're just regular buttons, but they're meant for gross motor movement. although they can be hit really easily with fingertips, they're kind of more meant for like bigger hits and bigger movement, because there's lots of little buttons on a regular controller. The heart of the system though is on the back. And this is basically every button that is on a regular Xbox controller has a port which you can plug a 3.5 millimeter port switch into. So this is a standard, what they would call accessibility switch. It's a normally open switch. They typically end in a 3.5 millimeter port. This has been this way for decades. And so we didn't want to reinvent anything. So you can basically plug this in. This is now the A button, right? And the reason why we have so many ports on the back is that we saw time and time again with a lot of assistive technology that they expected people to do software configuration to change them. And we saw with busy caregivers that that was a challenge. And so we wanted to make sure that reconfiguration could be as simple as unplugging it from A, and now it's the X button, and that's it, you're done. So every aspect of a controller can be externalized to an external device. Joysticks like this, joysticks like this big bad boy. This one's particularly good for quadriplegics. Let me see if I can get it in both cameras. Here we go. You know, so because they can use their palm to basically hit it. Yeah, and that's how it works. It is a regular Xbox controller. Windows PCs and Xbox consoles don't see it any differently than any other controller.
That is so cool. Thank you. And by the way, my first generation was actually the Fairchild, which almost nobody heard of. But that one was, I liked it more than Atari, even though I got the Atari as well. I love the adaptive controller, and it was always special for me because on Global Accessibility Awareness Day is when you guys launched it. And then in February, tell us what we could see on TV and maybe even show us.
Sure. Microsoft did an ad for the Xbox adaptive controller at the Super Bowl in February. To take you a little bit further back, we actually did an ad for Thanksgiving. It was our holiday ad where we introduced the world to Owen. And everyone loved that holiday ad. We did get some really good feedback from the accessibility community, which helped us focus more on the kids and less on us trying to make up a story, so that we let the kids talk with their own voice. But, you know, I think, and just so a little bit of backstory for that. So all the kids in the Super Bowl ad, which I'm about to show, were the kids that auditioned for the holiday ad because, you know, they're only like weeks apart. So, you know, they had to kind of go really quick. So I'm going to actually share. Can you all see that?
Not yet, no. Oh, there we go. Yes.
So this was the ad that we played at the Super Bowl.
My name is Grover. Sean. My name is Ian. I'm Taylor.
My name is Owen, and I am 9.5 years old.
I only have one. And yeah.
I love video games, my friends, my family, and again, video games.
Whenever I play it, it makes me feel happy.
The fun that you get to have with connecting with your friends.
Do you make your own rules?
It's his way of interacting with his friends when he can't physically otherwise do it.
When I'm playing with a regular controller, there's some things that don't work for me.
It's difficult for me to use both joysticks and the D-pad at the exact same time.
And it just slowed me down a bunch more while other people were like...
She's never had the freedom to play at the level she knows she could.
I never thought it was unfair. I just thought, hey, this is the way it is and it's not going to change.
What I like about the adaptive controller is that now everyone can play.
I don't even have to look at the controller and just be like looking at the screen like, hey, yep.
You never want your kid to feel like an outsider or an other.
One of the biggest fears early on is, how will Owen be viewed by the other kids?
He's not different when he plays.
It's a little challenging, but that's the whole point of gaming.
I can hit the buttons just as fast as they can.
And I think I can crush my friends.
No matter how your body is or how fast you are, you can play. It's a really good thing to have in this world.
So yeah, that's
My name is Grover.
Sean.
We'll stop playing that one now. Yeah, that was our Super Bowl ad. you know, it was great. I will say I was actually working on the ad for a few weeks before I actually knew it was going to be on the Super Bowl. We're really good at keeping secrets, even from each other. So you know, it was important for us to make sure that the kids in the video talked with their own voice and told their own stories. That was something we learned from the holiday ad. Working with the advertising team, which was amazing. They were very receptive. I think it's really natural to, especially when you're doing a holiday ad, to want to be heartfelt, to want to invoke emotion. But we always wanted to make sure, and I always stress to the advertising team, and they were very receptive to this, that Owen and all these other kids are champions, right? That they're the pinnacle of like what we're all trying to achieve. And it's not about, we really tried to stay away from inspiration porn. And that term's not universal for everybody, but it is something that the team was very receptive to, and they didn't want to do it. And we worked really hard to do that. And I will say that I feel the Super Bowl ad was a much better ad for us.
So I obviously knew about the ad, but I had never seen it until just now, and I just have chills. Yeah, and I have chills down my spine, and there's probably not a dry eye in the house. My God, that was so well done.
Yeah, it is an amazing ad. I actually used it just last week to open one of my, I was presenting at an all hands, and I love opening with that, because I think it just does get that message across of, when everybody plays, we all win. I love that tagline, because it's not about inspiration porn. It's just about inclusion. It's just about kids playing together. And I think that's the message. And, you know, kids almost always say it better than adults do. So
I will use that on all my presentations from now on, because the real key is people ask why is accessibility important? You just can't answer that question better than that. And what you've built with this controller is incredible. I mean, that's such a brilliant idea, the way you just keep it simple. You don't need a new kind of connector. I mean, I just love it.
But I just wanted to,
go ahead, Karo.
Oh, sorry. If I can just add to that, I was just going to say that also, I feel like you're really changing the culture. You're making it more positive from that perspective that, you know, in the past, I think when kids with disabilities were growing up, I don't think they expected things to be accessible, just because it even wasn't the topic of the conversation usually. Whereas now these kids in the ad and the kids who play with the switches, I think they already will have this idea that they are truly included in the society because products have been designed for them. And so I think that gives them like much bigger self-esteem, self-worth as they move forward in life. I think it's really more not just really about games. I think it's really helping change the culture in very big.
I will say that there's one, and I appreciate that immensely. And Ian, who's one of the kids in the video, actually says that he says, I didn't think it wasn't fair. I just thought it was the way it is.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that we're learning, or at least I'm learning through this, is something that goes to what you said. When you're born with a disability, you kind of you exist in this world, and you understand. You try to figure out your place in it. We started the adaptive controller by working with disabled veterans. So we started from a place where people who could play with a typical controller all of a sudden couldn't, right, because of injury. And I don't have my head wrapped around this yet, but it's you know, you go to a trade show, like, so this thing happened to me just before we all kind of went home, where I was at the ATIA trade show, and there was a kid there with cerebral palsy who basically who comes back every year just to like hang out with me and play video games, which is awesome. And you know, the joy that he has of just being able to play video games is amazing. And then 3 days later, after the ATIA show, I'm at a hospital in Seattle where I'm showing someone who's a quadriplegic how to play with this. And they're upset because they're still in the hospital after their injury. And so like they remember like a week or so ago playing with a regular controller, and now they're being told that this is what they're going to have to use. And that is different and can be, and how we deal with those situations and how we think about product development from that lens is something that's, I think, I'm going to have to look into a lot more.
I think the Xbox controller, adaptive controller, is such an interesting case study in, you touched on it before, Bryce, the social model of disability versus what has kind of traditionally been known as the medical model of disability. And for people not familiar with that, what that means is the medical model says, you are a person with a disability, you have a medical condition, it's something that, is your problem essentially, and maybe we can help to fix it with some medical interventions. And there are some cases where, there are advances in medical technology that can help with disability issues, cochlear ear implants, things like that. So there's I'm not anti, medical advances, of course, but the social model kind of flips it around and says, well, actually, people are disabled by encountering a barrier. So for the wheelchair user is not disabled necessarily inherently, but the stairs into the building disable them. So when they encounter in society, when they encounter an obstacle or a barrier, that's actually the thing that is disabling. So when you move that into the world of technology, it was the regular controller that was disabling to kids or adults with physical disabilities and motor differences, and that made it so that they couldn't use that particular controller. So designing for the alternative use cases actually solved the problem, and now they can play with everyone else. So that's the whole point. And we can take that analogy into websites, into mobile apps, into every bit of technology that we interact with every day. And so I think it's important that people in the technology industry begin to take more responsibility for not disabling people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the social model of disability is a useful one for product makers. It's what we use. I will say, though, that it's not the only model. Obviously, I mean, the identity model of disability is very present in people with disabilities' lives, and it's important to recognize that as well. But as a product maker, yes, I use the social model of disability to figure that out. I think even the name of the device, we called it the Xbox Adaptive Controller. I'm going to get another old man reference in here. But I remember in the 90s when AT stood for adaptive technology, not assistive technology, right? It was, I don't know when the change exactly happened, but I've been told that assistive was basically a politically correct or a more sensitive way that they were trying to do. And to be honest, when we made this device, we were striving for something that fit you. Right? It's not about it helping you. It's about this thing adapts to you. And again, we started with veterans. So it is very prominent in the disabled veteran community to adapt and overcome, right? It's very, but that is then about the person adapting. And so we really did want to think, no, like you're great. Like, let this thing adapt, right? So that was always the approach. And that's why we called it the adaptive controller.
Yeah, I love the name. I mean, look, when you were first showing that first generation of the controller, I was looking at it and I'm like, I have carpal tunnel just looking at that, because just so many memories of trying to fit my hands to these tiny devices. And yes, you should adapt it. I love this conversation because I've only gotten to one question that I prepared, and that's actually totally okay because it's fascinating where the conversation takes us, which leads me to the next one, which is not on my list. you mentioned inspiration porn, and to those of us that are in the accessibility community, all you have to do is say that word and we know what it means. But I think that a lot of folks that are not in the accessibility community have no idea what is inspiration porn, what is wrong with it, and does anybody want to comment and kind of explain it?
I mean, I'll say that if you really want to understand the topic, you should go watch Stella Young's TED Talk, where she introduced the concept, because it really is the best. It is the best introduction to it. But it is basically the idea of, well, you know, and I think everyone. I would love it if other people disagreed with me here, actually, to be honest. It's the idea of objectifying someone else's existence to make yourself feel better.
Yeah, I also think it kind of comes in some forms of, I think it starts from a perspective of pity, not, you know, sympathy, not empathy, the assumption that disability is inherently negative, for example. And from that perspective comes out these stories of amazement that a person with disability is just frankly living a normal life, or happy, or going about their day. And that somehow it's superhuman to go about your day if you have a disability, but it's not. It's just going about your day. And that's or things like, you know, every spring you see the prom stories of, you know, some football player has asked out, you know, a girl with disability, or, you know, vice versa. And it's just like, wow, you know, as if this should be such a, you know, not a normal thing. And so I think it's those kinds of, you know, feel good kinds of stories that really don't tell, they're just not authentic. They're not authentic representations of disability. And that's a big topic right now in the entertainment field.
Yeah. Kara, do you have anything?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I actually wasn't familiar with the term, but I feel like I live it, right? Because sometimes this is exactly what happens. Like, you do some small thing and people are like, wow, you know, how is it that, you know, you cannot see, but you, I don't know, chose the colors to paint the walls in beautiful pastel colors, or how can you choose, you know, your clothes at all, you know? And it's like, well, I can see enough to appreciate colors, so of course I can do it. Like, it's not rocket science, right? So simple things like that sometimes, you know, people have trouble believing that, you know, can be done. So yeah, so there is definitely that. I would counteract that though by saying that, hey, if it inspires somebody to act and actually move the needle in the field of accessibility, then so be it. So, like, you know, I would prefer that they wouldn't get stuck on little things like, you know, me being able to choose the right colors. But hey, if this is something that will inspire them and maybe create a piece of technology that helps others to choose colors, then so be it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the famous ones that people have complained about, and by the way, Karo, there's something blocking your camera a little bit. One of the things that people are posting is like people that got a cochlear implant or some other device that all of a sudden you can hear, and they just show video after video after video.
Little kids,
right?
like hearing mom's voice.
Yeah,
I mean, that is
exactly.
cool though.
No, it is cool, but it bothers a lot of people. Yeah.
I'll be completely honest. After the Super Bowl ad, I was on personal high alert around like inspiration porn, and people would come up to me, and Joe, you did this too. Like, you're like, oh, there's not a dry eye in the house. And people would come up to me afterwards with the ad and they'd say things to me like that. And I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Because I was basically like in this place where I was like, no inspiration porn, right? Like, and I was, and I had to work through this realization that people's emotions are valid, you know, and that like I can't. It's like that there's no malice, right? Like,
well, yeah. I mean,
so it was weird for me. Like, I remember going, oh wait, I'm the bad guy here. You know?
No, but that wasn't inspiration porn. Like, well, first of all, I said it in case anybody saw the tears in my eyes to cover myself. So that, but for me, the emotions were very strong because having worked in this field for almost a decade, it explain why it's important. And sometimes people, sometimes you'll have customers who will ask you, why do I need to spend some extra money to make something accessible? My favorite story is that one of them, who shall remain nameless, specifically asked us to remove an accessibility feature, and then because this gentleman is older, was unable to actually read on the app, their own app. And it was like, because we removed the accessibility feature, which you need because you're more in my age group, right?
Right.
So, this just explains the importance of it, right?
Yeah, and just because something makes us feel, warm or moved or touched doesn't automatically make it inspiration porn. I think that's the point. I don't think the Xbox controller commercial is inspiration porn. It's a lovely piece though, and it does, I think it inspires us to realize that we should be doing more of this, and we want to see more of this. And of course, it's just great to see kids playing together, and that's the world that we want to achieve. And so, you're a part of making that happen. So I think that part, it's inspiring, it's motivating. Watching, I loved Netflix documentary called Rising Phoenix, which is all about the history of the Paralympics. And, these Paralympic athletes really are inspiring. I mean, just like Olympic athletes are inspiring. So, certainly nothing I could do. And so it's inspiring to hear their stories. And so there is real inspiration out there. I think some of it comes from, what's the intent of the piece? And, is it just making an assumption that again, what are the assumptions underlying the piece of work? Is it, if it's to showcase amazing talent, like Paralympic athletes, great, but if it's just that normal life is somehow a superhuman effort on the part of people with disabilities, then that's not so great.
But still, I would say that sometimes it is what people need to see. Like, my assumption always is that people mean well. Mm-hmm. And so they're amazed because they have never seen a person with a disability. And so I think that, maybe the first video that they see, even if it's inspiration porn, it might be just what will, get them going. And then hopefully they will move on from that and, and see some other videos that bring a bit more value. But I feel like maybe sometimes this is the point at which you can start introducing them to basically just saying like, hey, this person is doing things just like you do. Okay, it may be some, they may do things in a different way, but they actually do exactly the same things that you do. So in a sense, even though we're all unique individuals, we're also the same in the sense that, we want to get through the day.
Yeah. So to me, this is not inspiration porn. And I'll like, as we've been talking, it kind of crystallized in my head why. To me, what inspiration porn is and what makes it bad is that what they'll do is they'll just take someone with a disability who is getting on with their life and trying to find an alternate way of getting around perhaps an issue that they might have, and then saying you're inspiring because you're getting on with your life. And to me, the ad is a little bit different in the sense that it's like, no, it's the developers, the designers, the product people who, instead of getting in the way of people from gaming, kids from gaming, is actually allowing kids to game. In other words, doing their job correctly. Because if you don't do it correctly, you're getting people, you're stopping kids from being able to play.
I don't think that the ad was an inspiration porn. I just wanted to kind of be the devil's advocate and just say that sometimes I feel like this is what people need to see, especially when they are just being exposed to the world of accessibility for the first time.
Absolutely. Like, and I think to even tie it back to Joe's story, like he had a customer that didn't appreciate accessibility even though he needed features. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the gaming accessibility movement, which is relatively new compared to every other kind of like digital accessibility movement, is you'll see some accessibility advocates, like my friend Cherry Ray. They say that all gaming settings are accessibility settings. All settings are accessibility settings, because it's just from a certain point of view, and it's it's true in a game to a certain extent. Like if you're changing the way that the game either looks or, or plays or moves or sounds, you're doing this for like your own sort of personal preference. And how is that not in some way accessibility? And I think it becomes really powerful when we talk about digital accessibility to embrace the idea that accessibility is just personalization across a wider spectrum, right?
Exactly. I've just been kind of exploring that theme myself, Bryce, and did it just a talk on it recently, where just exploring, for example, just all of the different devices. And so, in our space, we work on smart TVs and connected devices, Roku's, and, so you've got a wide range of devices, kind of similar to gaming, all these different platforms and devices. And each of them come with some capabilities that enable people to personalize their experience. And I was exploring the iOS accessibility settings, which are getting richer and richer all the time. Everything from saying, if I launch a website and it has too much motion on it, it can actually make me physically ill. It can give me a migraine or make me feel nauseous. So I might have a setting that's going to say, I prefer reduced motion. Don't autoplay a video. Don't give me parallax motion on the website. And the fact it is exactly a personalization. It's what, in some cases, personalizations are essential to use. So if I have to turn on voiceover or another built-in screen reader, it's a little beyond the personalization in the sense that it's essential for me to use this experience this way, but it's still an aspect of it. So I think it's an interesting blend of usability, personalization, accessibility. It's a Venn diagram for sure.
Yeah,
I think that's an
sorry, Karo, go ahead, please.
I was just saying, I think it's an awesome trend actually that I think is happening now in the accessibility field, is that the term accessibility actually is getting broader and broader and just more inclusive. And I think this is truly the way to go for the future. Because to be honest, having traveled the world, I see the issue with identifying with disability. So there are many people out there who would benefit from so-called accessibility features, but they would not use them if they are clustered under some accessibility settings, or they wouldn't identify themselves or any surveys as people, with accessibility needs, just due to different cultural issues in different countries. And the stigma still associated with disabilities in many countries. And so I feel like the more we can expose accessibility and accessibility settings, the more users will reach. And like whether we call it accessibility or even if the term itself evolves in the future and it's not called accessibility but something else, so be it.
Yeah, it's really like usability for more people. Essentially, I heard that somewhere and stole it. Whoever I stole it from, sorry. So this is a good lead in. I'm gonna switch to almost a commercial here, and I'm going to tell a little story. So the first time that I attended an accessibility camp in Los Angeles, I was part of a little startup that was doing videos and things like that. And we had captioners, and I tried to interview the captioners, and they just refused. And eventually somebody explained to me that was a faux pas, and you're not really supposed to mention the captioners because I'm not exactly sure I even understand fully why, but it's basically the captions are just a feature, and so you're not trying to highlight the people. But I'm bringing this up because everybody is living in the Zoom world, and I think a lot of people don't realize how something like captions that we have right here are working. So I just like to highlight that there are people that you can hire, and it's typically give or take somewhere around $100 an hour. And you have somebody, there's a little button, it's super easy, where you hand over the captioning to somebody. So I just wanted to let anybody that can hear me, whether it's now or later in the recording, please drop me a note. I know several captioners. If you need captioning on your event, it'll definitely be really useful. which I'm going to hand this to you, Lori, to comment on, but there's lately been some research that, what is it, something like 60% of people use captions, myself included, whether they have a visual disability or not. Since you are
there was a study done in the UK not too long ago that showed that of the, I believe it was 6.5 million people or 7.5 million people who regularly use closed captioning in watching videos, that only 20% were actually deaf or hard of hearing, and the other 80%, or something like 6 million people, used it for other purposes. So this is actually, so other purposes being things like maybe not being a native English speaker, or simply liking the kind of the clarity if the dialogue is fast, you know, and hard to hear. Obviously, the other use case being, you know, you're in a noisy environment and so you can't hear, when we used to all be able to go out to noisy environments, which you can't do anymore, but, or you're in a quiet environment and you don't have headphones. So there's lots of use cases. And of course, that's the classic example of designing for disability. Closed captioning was certainly something designed for people with disability. It was a technology that's been around for a very long time. It was like 1960s. The Julia Child cooking show was the first show with closed captioning on it. But it's a technology that's been around for quite some time. But again, people found it useful, just like in the physical world, you know, wheelchair ramps were designed for people in wheelchairs, but it turns out to be super useful if you're pushing a baby stroller or pulling a hand cart or whatever, so, or riding a bike. So we see this all the time. Then that's another point in the favor of leaning into disability, leaning into accessibility is, you know what, when you start to actually have to solve for these constraints, you end up designing something that, generally speaking, works really well for people in unexpected ways. So captioning is definitely one of those cases.
I can add to that. Ubisoft, when they put out Assassin's Creed Origins, which is two Assassin's Creed games ago, the accessibility leader at Ubisoft, David Tisserand, did a study, and 65% of people who played Assassin's Creed Origins had captions on. Mm-hmm. You know, so the majority of players had captions on. For their next game, for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they put on captions by default for everybody. Mm. And 90% of people left them on.
Wow.
So it is safe to say that from now on in Assassin's Creed games, when new one coming in 2 weeks, that the captions will be on by default.
That's great. Yeah, and when I'm in the airport or a sports bar, like I love having those captions on. So speaking of features that are on by default or that started out to be an accessibility feature and just proved innovation, Karo, didn't you have a story about some tagging in the Google Play?
Yes, so if you go to Play Store and if you download our Google Play Games app, it actually has the blind-friendly tag, which is just among all the other, so to speak, mainstream tags. And the idea is that it collects all the games that can be played by people who are blind. So the games will either be totally audio-based, or they will be adjusted to the screen reader. And we made an explicit decision to actually have that tag visible for everyone, because, well, first of all, I think that is quote unquote the right thing to do. It exposes the tag to everyone and just makes everyone a bit more aware of accessibility and of the users, but also on a practical level. You know, there has been a study done that, like, for each person with a disability, there are, like, statistically speaking, 2.5 people who care for that person. So, you know, the person with a disability obviously exists in the world. So they have friends, they have co-workers, they have teachers, caregivers sometimes, obviously parents. And so those would be the people sometimes who may see this particular tag and then say to their disabled peers or kids, you know, they may say, hey, have you seen this tag? You know, you may want to explore the games that are available there. So I think it's really awesome to just expose the tag making sure that it's visible to the target audience, but really also expose it for everyone, so that they think about accessibility and they can recommend it to their friends.
Yeah,
awesome.
just building on that a little bit, I just to Karo's point, I think the statistic I heard that if you combine friends and family with people with disabilities, you get to 53% of the consumer market. So it's really significant. I think again, and clearly we're in a world where particularly, younger people are very conscious of how companies are, behaving themselves in terms of sort of social responsibility, and they look for those things. So, people want to buy from brands they feel good about, they feel are kind of being responsible about sustainability, or accessibility being another area.
Yeah, diversity and inclusion has to include people with disabilities, or it's not really inclusion, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, question 2. But before I ask that, we've covered actually a lot of the topics organically, but I'd like to invite the audience. I don't see any questions in the Whova chat, so if anybody has questions, please drop them and we'll start to get to them shortly. Lori, you've worked on accessibility at several enterprise companies. Have you noticed a change over the years, and particularly with respect to the desire to include people with disabilities on the one hand, versus the actual improvement of the technology? Because sometimes the desire is there and the know-how of achieving it is not. So how has the landscape changed, if at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually a lot of layers to that. So I'll kind of take enterprise accessibility, so large scale, large organizations. I've had the chance to do that for about 10 years. And so, yes, it has definitely changed. One of the things that I think on the positive side, I feel like maybe I've just been fortunate, but I feel like I don't have to spend as much time making the business case for accessibility. I mean, some of these tidbits, of course, are good to trickle out and continue to support it. But I feel like there's better general awareness of what accessibility is and why we do it. And so that's a positive. I may, like I said, just have been lucky that I'm working in, progressive companies, but the other thing that's been interesting is that there, within the accessibility field of practice itself, there is becoming more specialization, which I think is a good thing. So I kind of came at accessibility from a program management standpoint, how to organize it, how to kind of structure it and get it going across a large organization. There are now more leadership roles. We see director, VP, maybe even chief accessibility officer in some companies. We're seeing people who are kind of beginning to specialize in UX design, inclusive design in those cases. Front-end developers, definitely. And then finally, I think not as much, but I'd like to see more of is product managers who kind of specialize in accessibility. So that's a good thing. So we're starting to see specialization. We're seeing the field of practice kind of grow and specialize and deepen. I think we're just beginning to see disability considered as part of overall diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. There's really needs to be a lot more of that. Like I said, it turns out that disability is actually the largest strand of diversity, and yet in most companies they are not paying attention to this. And there's a little, there's a funny film that the organization called the Valuable 500 out of the UK, I believe, produced. It's called Diverse-ish, and it's about how companies may tend to focus on one dimension or another of diversity, and we'll get to that next year, kind of thing. But we obviously, I mean, I think the complexity of human humans is that we're very intersectional, and there's all kinds of that going on. So I also think that the relationship between disability and inclusion and accessibility has not been well understood. We've got accessibility practitioners over here, usually in the technology space. We've got DEI practitioners over here, and it's time to bring that together. It's time to say, look, you can't have diversity, equity, and inclusion without disability inclusion. You cannot achieve disability inclusion without accessibility. When you want to hire people with disabilities into your organization, that's fantastic. They also have to have accessible tools to work with when they get there. So the employee experience is a huge territory for accessibility. The last thing I want to say about this, I could really talk about this subject a lot, but in terms of where is the technology on this, I feel that technology has to start making it easier to achieve accessibility. And by that, I don't mean add in an overlay or some horrible thing like that to your website. What I'm talking about is that Apple has done a good job, I think, of making it easier to create a native app that is reasonably accessible, without putting a ton of extra effort into that process. The problem is that we are not there on the web. We've got open source, JavaScript libraries, frameworks, content management systems, templates. We're all over the place. And so I would really like to see the industry lean in harder on saying, look, I think it should be a lot simpler to create an accessible website without knowing everything you have to know about accessibility and without doing it perfectly well right from the beginning. We should be able to pick components out of a library. We should be able to have alternative text baked into our CMS and accessibility checkers, by the way, that check our website for accessibility as we're building the pages. All of that should just be much, much more integrated. And I really think it's time for the industry to lean in on that problem.
Yeah, you're really speaking my language, and we've spoken offline before about these kind of things. But I do an annual state of accessibility report, always like looking at these issues, and it's not that there should be a library to make it accessible. It's that all of the big libraries should make this accessible by default. I'm working with Facebook on React Native. They took the GAD pledge to make React Native more accessible.
Right.
So we're kicking that off and trying to get more of these frameworks to do that. And for next year, since you kind of brought this up, or tangentially, next year, what I'm really looking at is the accessibility teams inside the enterprises are just have just way too many tasks to do. And then as hard as that side of it works on things, on the other side, you have procurement that goes out to an agency to build out stuff. The agency claims that they're accessible, but they typically don't know anything about accessibility. And I think that's something that really needs a lot of work. Now, we do have a question from the audience, but before I get to it, I'm going to touch on one other thing, since this is DataCon LA. The typical question that comes up when it comes to accessibility and data science and AI is always the bias of these systems, and I don't know if that's going to be as big an issue. I think people with disabilities probably are more ignored than others, but everybody brings it up at every single panel that I've seen. So I think people are aware of it by this point. But what I'm seeing a bit of is that some companies are coming out and saying, hey, I'm going to use AI to detect what's wrong, what makes a website inaccessible, and fix it automatically. Any thoughts on that?
I think obviously our tools need to be more accessible, but I'm really against this idea that we can automate accessibility away in any way, in any form. Like, I'm super glad, Joe, that you're working with React Native, but we talked about the social model of disability, and we talked about how people who aren't familiar with disabilities possibly unintentionally create disability, right? And frameworks being accessible by default isn't going to necessarily solve that. So, I mean, I think Karo touched on this a bit earlier. Like, we need people to embrace disability a little bit more. And so it is also what Lori touched on. Like, there's this whole D&I track, this whole tech track, and they think they're doing different things and they're not, or they shouldn't be, right? So yes, there's going to be some super powerful AI that will empower people with disabilities. And but you know, we're also going to create new things that will create barriers for people with disabilities unintentionally, because they're created by people who have their own worldview and their own experiences, and we tend to create things based on our own life experiences. So you know, I laugh when people tell me, when I hear accessibility advocates say that someday they hope to be out of a job, because that just means that we're not going to be creating new things, and that's not going to ever happen. So
definitely agree with you there. I've had several VCs ask me to evaluate if this is possible for AI to take care of it. And I wish I'd have thought of this line then, but it just came to me. The reason this is never going to happen is that what is AI other than like you're throwing spaghetti up against the wall and you're just trying to see what sticks? That's just never going to do it for you. You need a human being to really look it over.
And I think that's the critical piece here. You know, is that you know, there is the phrase "nothing about us without us," and the fact is we need people with disabilities actively participating, actively working in designing AI systems and designing machine learning. There was a good project, I think it came out of Microsoft, Bryce, that around people with visual disabilities who were taking pictures of their objects in their home, some of which were kind of custom to what a person, you know, like a Braille, you know, a Braille input device or something like that. So, but just taking lots and lots of photographs and then kind of feeding that in for machine learning. So, you know, it's all, to me, it's participation. You know, if people with disabilities participate in creating and designing and shaping the influence of AI, then it won't be biased against people with disabilities. But if they don't, or they don't have the opportunity to do that, then it will.
I mean, maybe the whole practice goes away when we're all basically designing inclusively. Like when it's just part of what we do all the time, right? I don't know. Sorry, Karo, please go on.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I couldn't agree more with you guys. And I do think that even from my own perspective, like I feel like another part of my own job description is really just to be among other people, just to help educate them, because I'm probably the only person they know, you know, who is low vision. So on the one hand, like I know you don't want to feel like this representative, and you don't want other people to assume that every person with low vision, you know, acts the way I do. But at the same time, you know, this is the only person they know. And so you kind of feel almost like an advocate for the, you know, disability community in some way. And yeah, I feel like maybe this is also a way to move the needle, is just basically to be among people. And again, to not assume that anybody is mean, but just assume that they really don't know anyone with accessibility needs, and just really start from scratch. And I really think that education is a truly big piece. I mean, we have a lot of educational events going on at Google Play, and you know, we meet regularly with our developers and just make sure that they are supported in their work. And it's not because they don't know how to code, but it's really just reminding them about the importance of accessibility, or perhaps solving similar issues that they may be dealing with, you know, because it's not something they deal with on an everyday basis. They don't have any disability. So it's just a matter of, you know, making it part of their day, or at least a monthly meeting.
Well said. And Lori, I think the app you were referring to was Seeing AI.
Yeah, that might have been in that context.
Yeah. I would, for the audience, you can go to the App Store and just download it. It's a super cool app. I actually once demoed it at a talk. I asked if there were any volunteers. A friend of mine came up and the Seeing AI took a picture of her and guessed her age correctly. And it was a pretty funny moment, because she was like,
it usually like, kind of skews a little older, was my experience.
Yeah, but they nailed it on the money. She's like, oh, I wasn't going to announce that, but yes.
There's also, you know, just in the interest of making sure that our people know everything, there's a wonderful app on the Play Store called Lookout by Google. that basically does the same thing.
Yeah, I met that team.
Thank you for mentioning it.
Fair play. I like that. All right. Terry Davids asks, how can the general public help in increasing awareness about accessibility issues?
You know, increasing awareness, it's so interesting. For me, it's not about awareness. Like, people with disabilities exist; they're everywhere. You know, it's really just like I feel like it's not awareness that we need. It's just more of intentionally inviting people with disabilities into everything that we kind of do, right? You know, because I think, you know, we've touched on this throughout the whole talk. For me, one of the biggest challenges I see with working with people who may be resistant to accessibility is this general discomfort with disability. And that's the part that needs to go, right? Like,
well,
yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is that people are not necessarily aware. It's two points here. One, 70% of disabilities are invisible. So you're walking around, you're talking to people, you're working with people who have disability. There's no question about it. Even if they're temporarily experiencing something like mental illness, depression, anxiety, which a lot of people are right now. That's a 2020 thing for sure. You know, you are interacting with people with disability, whether you know it or not. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. It isn't an us versus them, okay, to Bryce's point. But the other thing is that I like to encourage people, everyone, to think of accessibility as a practice, as a habit. And there are actually some really interesting and simple ways that we can practice accessibility. You don't have to be a developer or a product designer. When you create a Word document or you create an email, you can check it for accessibility before you send it out. When you start up a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, I mean, Zoom, you have to kind of add it in a little bit, Teams bakes it in, and you can say, hey, everybody, if you'd like to see captions, here's how to turn on captions. So there are just these little practices that we can incorporate into our daily work. You know, in Outlook, there's a way to turn on that you'd like to receive accessible emails, so that when someone sends you an email, it'll actually say one of the recipients wants to have an accessible email. So just these little things kind of raise awareness, you know, about, oh, what's this accessible email thing? What's that about? And that begins a conversation, maybe begins some exploration. So I really would encourage everybody to use the tools that are out there and just practice it. And you'd be surprised how much that might lead to.
And also, if I may add to that also, is never assume that whoever your audience is doesn't have any accessibility issues, right? Because you really never know. So let's say if you design an app, don't just assume that there's nobody in that group of users who you know, may use a screen reader or who may use captions or whatever else. I think start with assuming that actually there is somebody like that in your audience. And I think that already changes your outlook on things, and at least will make you think of accessibility. Even if you don't solve it 100%, I guess you will make a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Just made me think of one small thing that everyone can kind of do. When you're on social media, alt texture media, whether you know people who are blind or not, just do it. Just make it happen.
Yeah, and if you're producing a video, if you produce a video, caption it. It's one of the simplest things you can do, actually.
Yeah. I'd like to add that, yes, you never know who in your company, and this is something that a couple of you were saying, who has a disability. We have an inclusive company that's all around accessibility, and it's happened to us a couple of times that disability wasn't disclosed. So if it happened in a company that's like super accepting of it, you can bet that it's happening everywhere. And also, I usually don't like when moderators answer questions, but I'm gonna take on this one since it was about awareness, and I co-founded Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So I think that's an exception. So the reason that I came up with the idea was that as a developer, It was actually Victor Caran, who Karo knows. He did this video of how to use a screen reader on Yahoo. He was working at Yahoo at the time. And I was just shocked because I had never heard of a screen reader. And I realized that, and in it, he was kind of explaining how you can, if you build technology incorrectly, you create disability, as you were saying before, Bryce. So seeing that, I was like, oh my God, like I'm always on the bleeding edge of tech. And if I didn't know about this, I'm sure that others don't. And it's not a matter of not caring. It's just a matter of lack of awareness. That was the purpose of creating the day. So, if you want to make more people aware of it, if you follow the A11Y hashtag on Twitter, and then once a year on Global Accessibility Awareness Day is the third Thursday of May, if you follow the GAD hashtag, GAAD, you will see lots and lots on awareness. And I also love that alt text idea. So there's that. And now looks like we've got another question. What are some good resources for this?
Well,
so
one of the
let's say learning. Go ahead.
One of the resources I can think of is we have a Play Academy. And so we offer different courses that are free of charge. We offer them in different languages, not just English, but like Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, and so forth. And we do have an Introduction to Accessibility course, which I encourage every developer to take, because that's going to just introduce you to basic concepts. And then obviously you can go to like Android developer website to look at specific accessibility solutions.
Yeah, I guess we have something similar with our Accessibility in Action badge program. It takes you through a lot of the techniques that Lori talked about around making accessible emails and presentations and Word documents. And then you get a little badge that you can put on your LinkedIn profile. That's a good place to start.
I also like Teach Access is a nice kind of starting point. Teach Access is a nonprofit that's working to get accessibility more built into the curriculum in colleges and universities, and it's got a lot of industry participation as well. So that's a nice starting point for someone just really learning. But it's, again, there's a lot out there. It's Google it, and if you've got a particular question, there's an answer out there for sure. There's also an accessibility Slack channel, and if we didn't say it before, A11Y is an abbreviation for accessibility, because accessibility has 11 letters and we all mistype it too many times, and so we sometimes shorten it to A11Y. So
numeronym.
Yes.
Just a quick thing over here. We also have another accessibility talk today by Sherry Byrne-Haber, head of accessibility at VMware. Today it's at 3:30, so that's also a good opportunity to learn. She's going to be talking about machine learning applications in accessibility. Specifically, VMware's open source effort on VA11Y.
Yeah, Sherry's great. So definitely attend that one. I'm going to add also knowbility.org, and that's spelled like no, KNOWBILITY. And they have something called the AIR, the Accessibility Internet Rally. So that's another good one. And then there's DQ University, DEQUE University I think it's .com or .org, probably .com.
Funny, when I get this question, I'm terrible at it. And you folks have just like said a bunch of different things that I already knew about. Like, so I should really just write these down.
Yeah, and W3C also has a course on that, an online course. But the Twitter community is so active that if you just ask a question, tag it with A11Y, you'll get an answer.
Absolutely. I could also add the WebAIM. I think it's a very well-known website. Yeah, and it has a bunch of filters also through which I guess you can look at your website and see how people with different visual disabilities will see what you've designed. I think it's very cool. And also they have a lot of interesting resources and statistics on disability. So I feel like it's a very, very cool website.
Yeah, that they're great. They're really great. ASL. Can someone just speak a bit about ASL, as well as like, which is American Sign Language? Are we going to see an automated sign language? Can AI solve this or not?
Well, Lori, I want you to jump in here, but I just want to say one thing.
Go ahead.
ASL is a language. It's not a translation of English into movement. So you have to think about it as a unique language.
Yeah, it's a unique language. It's an expressive language. It's very nuanced. I think I would make a prediction that we're going to see better automatic speech recognition for captions long before we're going to see anything that remotely comes close to the human experience of ASL. So I think there's a lot of work going on right now with live captioning. They are far from perfect as it is. If you think about all the things that even just captioning has to cover, accuracy, completeness, punctuation, accents, placement of the captions, the synchronicity, how tightly synchronized is it from, those are still challenges in the world of ASR, or automatic speech recognition for live captioning. Automated ASL, I mean, there's some preliminary things happening to kind of research how you could create a library of motions and such, but I think we are a long way from that. So that'll be my prediction. If you've ever watched ASL interpreters and seen different ones, and there's actually some really fun stuff happening with rap and concerts and people who are doing ASL for kind of live music events, and man, it's fun to watch. So I just don't think you get that. It's conveying so much emotion. I think that would just be hard to translate.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are deaf, for people who are deaf who are ASL first, English is their second language. Right. That's just always important to remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's
and it's the verbal versus visual, right?
Right.
Kara, you were going to say something?
Nope.
Oh, okay. And how many different sign languages are there?
That's a good question.
I was at a conference in France that had like ASL and FSL like at the same time. It was wild.
Yeah, so. I mean, I've kind of always assumed that there's about as many as there are cultures, but I don't actually know the answer to that question. Yeah, I know there's British, even British and American are different. And there's clearly Spanish, French, and I'm gonna think that there's a lot of others.
I've been told that French is actually closer to American than British is to American.
Really? Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't actually know. That's wrong.
I was more like trying to suss out that a lot of people think there's one sign language when pretty much every language has one. I think there's over 100 or hundreds, some large number.
I would guess.
Yeah.
It's very culture based. Like I remember when we were in Thailand and they were showing us a sign for coffee, and it was basically it had something to do with like mixing, because they drink coffee with milk and sugar. So it's fascinating.
I've seen some great videos of the videos of songs that are extremely expressive. There's one famous one that was a little off color. The song was a little off color, and the seeing it being signed just took on a whole new level. And sometimes I like to bring this up because what often happens, people don't want in a professional setting to talk about, let's say, swear words or things like that. And it's like you're basically locking out people with disabilities from everyday life because you're saying, oh no. So like I did a presentation, and unfortunately sometimes, I'll admit it, I do curse sometimes, and like I'm trying to curse and they're changing they're removing it from the captions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is offensive to me. Am I wrong?
No, we have a very active discussion in our internal hard of hearing and deaf community about how auto captions deleting swearing is wrong. And what's interesting about it is that when you talk about auto captions, the challenge is that if the auto captions gets it wrong, like let's say you say a word and the auto caption thinks you're swearing and then puts in a swear word, that's also really embarrassing, like from that other point of view. So this is the challenge. It's about, like, you know, like Lori said, it's about accuracy. It's about a lot of this, a lot of these things. But yeah, no, the consensus in our internal communities is clear. No, I want to see swearing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, it's cultural, right? Like, you don't want to protect people with disabilities. You want to give them a choice just like everyone else. I think that's where it starts. You know, and putting even a broader perspective on it, it's kind of like with the games. I think when accessibility started, it was really more about being productive, you know, at your job. I think now it evolved to include, you know, games and social settings and rock concerts, like Lori mentioned. So I think now accessibility has this much broader perspective, which it should.
As it should, right? Because we're looking for full participation in society, and that includes everything, doesn't it? And that's what the Americans with Disability Act was really all about. Was not just don't discriminate. It was actually that people with disabilities are entitled to full participation. And that, so, and I like to use the phrase equivalent experience sometimes with teams to help them understand that, you know, in your swearing example, the equivalent experience is to see the swear spelled out in the caption, because that's what the experience is. That's what hearing people are gonna experience. And so equivalently, you know, sometimes I'll have product teams ask me about, well, you know, do I have to put this information into, you know, into something that the screen reader can announce? And it's like, well, are you displaying it on the screen? And yes, you do. You know? It's quite simple.
I know when I do my own captions, I will say I'm vain and I edit out my ums.
Yeah, there's a software that does that, right, automatically. What was it called again? I forget the name of it, but hopefully it'll come to me. We have one last question from the audience, and then I'm going to let you do the final remarks if we even have time. Not sure if this is the right forum. This is Lucas, but as it's not really a technical issue, as we enter a world of masked public reality, how important are clear masks? Are they effective?
Ooh, yeah. That's a great question. That has definitely been something that I've been, you know, reading about, posts from people in the deaf, hard of hearing community saying, you know, in fact, I actually personally encountered someone. I was picking up my daughter from a school event, and I started talking to a woman, and she said, I can't, you know, I need to read lips. And I was like, oh, okay. But so yes, you can buy clear masks, and it does help for people who need to read lips. So be something we could consider.
Right. I've heard it's not that good though.
Like I know our team at Microsoft has purchased clear masks for some of the employees. But you know, it's early, right? Yeah, like definitely the community is asking for people to have them. It's just weird though, right? Because they tend to be like, hey, people who are hard of hearing, here's a clear mask. When it's like, no,
it's the everyone else.
I get confused sometimes. All right, we have 3 minutes, so I'll let first. Thank you, everybody. I love this. I love you guys. I could talk. I could talk with you all for hours. This was, to me, not a panel. This is just fun, friends, new friends, and some old friends. So, but I'd like to give you now 2 minutes to give final thoughts.
I'll go. I just want to encourage people to intentionally include people with disabilities in the things that they create. And what I mean by that is to engage the community, to participate in the community. I think I'm all for technical solutions. I'm a technologist, but those technical solutions need to be grounded in what the community actually needs. And the only way we know what the community needs is by being with the community.
Yeah, and I guess I would like to stress the point that I made earlier is please don't make any assumptions whenever you either interact with a person with disability or whenever you design a product for anyone, because you really don't know who's gonna benefit from your product and who's gonna use it. So so make no assumptions and just be open-minded. I think that's gonna always help and educate yourself.
Yeah, and I would kind of continue to build on that. Absolutely, that just, you know, engage with people with disabilities, employ people with disabilities. They're creative, they're problem solvers, they're, you know, like original hackers, whatever you want to call it. These are people who, you know, go about their lives and tend to have to figure out how to overcome an obstacle or solve a problem or approach a problem from a different standpoint. So bring people with disabilities into the mix. Design for disability, and you're designing for everyone. And wherever you are in your organization, no matter what it's doing about it, start taking some simple steps to raise awareness and move the needle forward in accessibility.
Thank you. And then quickly, social media. How do people reach you?
Bryce. I'm Bryce J on Twitter. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Lori Samuels 18.
And I'm Rainbow Poetess.
That's awesome. We can
on Twitter.
We could probably do 15 minutes on the poetry. And I'm at Joe Devon, and we are out of time. But thank you all. This was wonderful, and I can't wait for the next time and to see you all in person after COVID.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks.
Bye, Bryce. Bye,
Thanks,
Karo.
Subash.
Nice chatting with you all.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.